So today we're going to have a chat about Universal Audio's Apollo interfaces and the new add-on from Sonarworks SoundID for X-Series interfaces. A lot of people are talking about this. There's a lot to cover, so let's dive right in. I'm Reed, and the purpose of this channel is to help you level up your musical artistry. If you work in a less than perfect acoustical environment, you may have already heard of SoundID, which is Sonarworks room correction software. If you also have an Apollo X series interface as well, then perk up your ears. So here's the concept. You have a room, and that room exhibits some undesirable sonic signature. The room is maybe amplifying or attenuating some frequencies depending on how the frequencies bounce off the wall. Maybe it's asymmetrical. So my mix room has some problems, especially in the bass. What I did first was I ran out and I got some ceiling clouds, which helped, and I built some diffusers. By the way, here's a pro tip. Don't build these yourself unless you've got a lot of time on your hands, because it's a big job. This graph right here is a graph of the frequency response after those corrections. So looking at the graph of this room, you can see that much of the problems are in the bass range. This is tricky because bass is the hardest to control. Bass is non-directional, and bass frequencies are the hardest to absorb. So these bass problems require large, thick panels to address, 4 to 6 inches, rigid insulation. Also, having some space between the panel / wall or ceiling is helpful, which is why they're called bass traps. The bass reflections get trapped in that void between the acoustical product and the wall or ceiling, and they're dissipated as energy. And then what comes back through is much softer. A treated room means you hear less reflections and more of the direct signal, for example, from the speaker. These traps are most often made out of Owens Corning 703 rigid insulation or rock wool or some other comparable product. You can do this as a DIY project fairly inexpensively, by the way, if you have the time. You can find a lot of videos here on YouTube where they'll show you how to build a frame, put the insulation in it, and get an acoustically transparent fabric to wrap around that frame. In spite of the bass problems, there's some good news in this room. We're not experiencing comb filter problems that you would have in smaller rooms. Also, what we're not experiencing is resonances that come from the building materials. Like if you live in a place that it's just made out of sheetrock, it's not so solid and it will resonate. Okay, so this room does have a lot of glass. That's the windows, but it's also asymmetrical. Now, why am I saying that like it's positive? The reason why is because there's no parallel surfaces other than the floor and the ceiling. So when sound ricochets around the room, it hits a non-parallel surface. It doesn't come straight back. By the time it gets back to my ears, it's not so troublesome anymore. Early reflections cause waves to meet at similar amplitudes in the mixing spot where you're sitting. In situations where they meet and they are in phase, they actually amplify each other because they're in the crest of the wave, as we call it. In situations where they're out of phase, they attenuate each other. So a crest and a trough meet in the same place, and they cancel each other out. In the graph I showed earlier, that's what's happening. In other words, the room is not telling the truth about what's actually on the recording, and that's why it's hard to make decisions. And that's why you hang out in your car all the time listening to the music you're mixing, because your room is not telling you the truth. So there's a couple more problems I can think of that come up in rooms when you're treating them. One is called comb filtering, and that's more problematic in smaller rooms. It's a hollowed out sound that sounds like a guitarist's phaser pedal, and it is a series of notches in a broadband sound, which is why it looks like tongs of a comb. Another is called flutter echo, and flutter echo is also bad in small rooms. It's the sound of a rapid delay, like ripping paper, and you can hear it if you clap your hands. So the third thing I can think of is if you have excessive uncontrolled reverb. That's very problematic in a live room, because in a live room you want someone to be able to set up anywhere. So everywhere in the room needs good control. Play some music and then stop it abruptly. You'll hear what your room's reverb sounds like. If the reverb is too out of control, then it will mask softer sounds that are in your mix, and that's the thing you have to watch out for. For these things I just mentioned, you really have to have physical sound treatment to deal with these issues. Okay, so Sonarworks software applies the correction. You get a microphone from the factory, well, in the deluxe package, I guess. They sell it to you, and it is calibrated at the factory, and it has a system ID. And they have it logged there, and when you open the standalone software, you put in your ID and it knows what your microphone is calibrated to. Then you have a target curve, which is pretty flat, and this would be nice to get this. You measure your existing frequency response. The measured curve in this room is this, which is pretty challenging, as you can see. The correction curve applied is this. It's essentially a mirror image of the measured curve. That means the estimated result is this, which is pretty impressive, right? So now this is accomplished by that measurement microphone, and then you open the standalone version of the software, and it senses your positioning by sending sonar kind of beeps, which is where the name of the company comes from. When you're in place, it plays a sweep tone, which tells the mic how your room is performing in reproducing that sweep tone. So SoundID is a fabulous tool to solve my problem. It's used over a couple 100,000 rooms across the world, they say. Is it just a glorified EQ? Maybe, yeah, but it works for me very well, and it saves me time. There is some software called REW, which is room measurement software, and you could use that, and it will tell you more than Sonarworks does. I'll put a link in the description for that. I think it's free. In the past, I had tried SoundID in a few ways. Number one was to put it on the master bus of the DAW, which is what they suggested. But here's two things that can happen. One is you may forget to bypass, and God forbid you ship that mix without being bypassed. Secondly is you can't hear the live inputs in UA console with correction. The only way you can do that is if you enable audio pass-through in your DAW, which means it's going to take a round trip through the computer in the DAW, and that is going to make it arrive late in your talent's headphones, which is not something they're going to like. Second way is to use it in system-wide mode. Now, this is a great idea, but there's a couple of things that were off-putting for me about that. One is that latency was still a bit of an issue. And two, it's like I think I remember this, but I think it puts the system out before the Apollo out, which, if that's true, it would cause the live inputs again to be unprocessed. The third way I tried using this was as a plug-in in Rogue Amoeba's SoundSource. SoundSource is a great app. It exists on the master bus of the computer, and it has its own engine that it throws in there. And as they've been updating it, that engine has gotten weirder and weirder and more crackly and everything. So I have finally given that up. And then so I was hanging out one day, I look at my email, and we have SoundID for Apollo. I dared not dream. I thought of it, but I dare not dream, because I've been using software for a long time. I know that the dreams will get you sometimes. This is great. But now on to a few quirks. It wouldn't be a Reed Robbins video if I didn't complain a little bit, right? So Sonarworks has a beautiful website. It's all white. It just feels like you're in some sort of music video, but it's circular. You press a link, it takes you to a page. You press another link, it takes you back to the first page. They need, for an idiot like me, they need some sort of instruction that tells you exactly step by step how to do this thing. So I couldn't find a video, I couldn't find the instruction, and I eventually figured it out, but it was kind of a pain. The UA software upgrade was very simple though. Went to the UA Connect app, everybody has one these days. I was already logged in and I just updated, and there I went. So I have a 4-device system, and I think it's kind of encouraging to hear what the devices are. So my Apollos, the first one is a silver face from 11 years ago, 2013. I have a twin I got somewhat after that, and then an X8, which was the first generation, plus a satellite octo. This system is only Thunderbolt 1, and the silver face was originally Firewire. I put in a Thunderbolt add-on card at some point. That's encouraging, since not everything needs to be brand spanking new. Even though the older devices are present, everything is still good if the X series is the monitoring unit. I'm still using the whole thing. So would I recommend an Apollo system to someone who's just getting into it now? Well, I don't know. You have to look at what the cost is, how much money's in your wallet, and what you need. See, I've had UA plugins since the 1990s when Mackie was selling them. And I had a Mackie D8B, which was one of the first digital boards, and you could put a card in and you could use some UA plugins. So I put that card in, and then I just upgraded from there. So now I have almost all the plugins, and I've upgraded to these various systems over the years. So it's good for me. For you, you'd have to think about it pretty hard. Personally, the latency with running round-trip signals through a DAW is a big problem for me, and the Apollo system solves that. This is especially important for client work. The latency is reported as being pretty minuscule, 1.1 milliseconds, even with 4 plugins per channel. So in regards to upgraders, the integration of SoundID is a winner for me. The fact that I already had the Apollo system, the fact that I already had SoundID, $50 was a steal. Sound is really nice in my room. I already had profiles made for all of my 4 speakers, so I just popped the one in that corresponds to the main output. And this leads me to some limitations and feature requests. What I heard from UA's people is that the things I was mentioning were their most requested features, and these are things that they seem to have the ability to be able to change. And they'll tell you when something's hard to change. Merging auxes, forget about it, no go. Names on channel strips being global, it's really hard. They finally did it. Limitation number 1, metering. Meters read differently on the unit's LEDs versus the console on-screen meter versus the DAW output. They said use DAW metering, ignore the clipping on the interface. That's a little unsettling. Limitation number 2. At present, only correction can be on the main output, but not the alt speakers. Limitation number 3. The correction is in interface only, so it won't pass to outputs. Now, when is that a problem? When you're mirroring outputs on QSENs. You have a bunch of people in here with Sony MDR 7506s on their heads, and you'd love to just be able to pass that correction through the mirrored output to your headphone distribution box, where it can then come in, and we can all be happy and listen to that. You can set it up in your DAW. It's not that hard, but it sort of takes away some of the goodness of having this all in the Apollo interface. Limitation number 4, when the UA console boots, the correction is always off, at least in my experience, even if you left it on. This seems weird to me. Maybe you can envision why. If so, give me a comment, but it's true of both the speaker and headphone profiles, which you have to re-enable every time you start up. I'm in a room, I have the same speakers, the speakers are in the same place, and you wouldn't be using this with speakers anyway if you didn't already have a profile which you had created. So why do you have to turn it on every single time? I can see forgetting that. Now, as far as getting a new Apollo system or getting new SoundID software, I'm very happy with it. If you have the funds, if you have the need, go ahead. I think it's a great idea. But if you fall in the category I fall into, which is that I already had my X series interface, I already had SoundID, it's really a no-brainer. At least try out the trial, which lasts 14 days. For me, I'm happy. See you soon. Limitation number 2. Limitation number 2. There's only one. Limitation number 3.